Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM, channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, part two of our conversation about the federal workforce and President Donald Trump's executive orders as he looks to trim the federal government and, in some cases, eliminate entire departments. So last night, we spoke to the American Civil Liberties Union, D.C., and the American Federation of Government Employees. Well, tonight, we'll hear a perspective from a member of Congress and a legislative and policy advocate. My guests are Congressman Glenn Ivey, a Democrat from Maryland's 4th Congressional District, and Sky Perriman, President and CEO of the nonpartisan organization Democracy Forward. Thank you both for joining the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
Let me start with you, Congressman. What are you hearing from your constituents this week about the president's actions?
Well, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of concern. This is before this week, too. We did a town hall meeting, teletown hall meeting about 2 weeks ago. Had to cap it at 16,000 participants. People calling in to see what they thought could be done to deal with this and, express their concerns and try and figure out a path forward. We tried to help them manage that as well. And then we've also had a chance to reach out to, other leaders in this area, whether it's litigation or advocacy. That's how I came to cross paths with Ms. Perriman, who's doing outstanding work on this front as well. And I've been working with the Congressional Black Caucus and members of the House Democratic Caucus to try and figure out ways we can push back on this and protect federal civil servants.
What are your colleagues in the Black Caucus, as well as some of your colleagues across the aisle, saying? Certainly, I'm sure you have some relationships with members of the GOP.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, their focus this week has been more on some other issues. The pardons of the 1,500 January 6th criminal felons, frankly, has been a big focus of theirs. Obviously, I'm in a different place than they are on that topic. But on this one in particular, we've reached out to House Democrats and some in the Senate as well, like Chris Van Hollen, one of my colleagues here in the Maryland Senate, to sort of try and think through how to go about dealing with this. But it's an enormous challenge. We've got a lot of things to try and focus on. I think some of this is going to have to be addressed in court. There are going to have to be lawsuits similar to the one that was just filed the other day. And actually, I guess an injunction's been put in place on the 14th Amendment, citizenship one. And also, there's some issues there where some of these executive orders, I think, have sort of bled over into areas where I don't know that he's got the authority to do some of those things. Eliminating some of these offices that were established by statute, I don't know if he can do that by executive order, but those are the kinds of things we're going to have to think through.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Perriman, certainly your office has been extremely busy over the past week or so. Before we get into some of the actions that your office has been taking, talk to me a little bit about Democracy Forward. Talk to me about this organization. What are you doing? What is your focus?
Democracy Forward is an organization for the American people. You can learn more about us at democracyforward.org. We were founded in this crisis in 2017, where after being in office for just a few days, the president started flagrantly violating the law, harming people and communities, and seeking to really undermine American values. There have always been valiant lawyers out there to represent people and communities and to represent my favorite client, which is the client of democracy, organizations like the ACLU and others that you have had on even your show recently. But there were so many things that the administration were doing to harm people and communities. There was a need for additional lawyers to go to court for people. and to defend their rights. And so that's how Democracy Forward was founded. We took and had to take over 100 legal actions against the first Trump administration, and we won a lot of those actions, shut down corrupt commissions that were operating under the shrouds of secrecy, if that sounds familiar, helped protect the independence of our civil service. We reversed a lot of problematic policies that were taking money out of communities for community programs, that were seeking to undermine our environmental protections, and more and more and more. And over the last 3 years, Democracy Forward actually has been expanding its work, because January 6th showed us that these threats to democracy did not leave when President Trump left the White House the first time, but that they were, really across the country. And so we are ready for this moment. We were built for this moment, and we are here to help the American people use the tools that we have in this country, including going to court, to defend their rights.
It seems to me, based on what you're sharing, that what is old is new again. Can you talk to me about some of the legal actions your organization is taking just this week?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it is true. What's old is new again. This is the same playbook that we saw. It is the same playbook that was horribly unpopular with the American people the first time. It is going to be horribly and is horribly unpopular with the American people this time. However, the Trump administration has some more experience than they did last time. And so they're moving a bit quicker on some of these areas, including around our civil service, which I know we'll talk about here. But we filed a case just minutes after Donald Trump was inaugurated to challenge the shroud of secrecy that the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is operating under. No one elected Elon Musk, and a president can definitely have any advisor he or she wants to have, but there are rules in this country that ensure that the American people know who is advising, how are they advising the government, that enable the American people to have a say in the way their government works and not be shut out of the process. And so we brought that suit on behalf of teachers and veterans and consumer advocates and good government groups and so many people, public health groups, who are seeking to challenge the secrecy that the Trump administration is already, showing that it's operating under. And then this week, of course, we've been seeking to support civil servants through our work at civilservicestrong.org. The president came in and immediately started firing some people or putting people on notice about their employment. These are people that, really have done nothing with their careers other than serve the American people under Republican administrations, under Democratic administrations, but he's really seeking to decimate that. So we have a lot of legal challenges that we're planning, and you'll be seeing us in court a lot if the last few days is any indication of what we're in for.
Congressman, as it relates to your constituents, the community, the district that you represent, you've got a lot of federal government workers. Have you heard from them directly? What kind of conversations have you had with them, particularly, obviously, as it pertains to the Schedule F?
Yeah, I've heard from quite a few, and this is even after the town hall meeting that I mentioned earlier. But you've got different federal workers in different places. So you've got, for example, people who are still on probation. They're worried that they're going to be fired immediately or pushed out. I've heard from some people who were recently hired but hadn't started working yet, and they're worried about whether they'll be able to start their positions or not. For example, one was, I believe, a nurse for the Veterans Administration. She was looking to relocate so she could come to work in the DC area. And, now that's all up in the air. So the plans that she had made so that she could relocate, and that may include leaving a job that she already had, are now potentially up in the air and might not be able to move forward. You've also got people who've been working, they're non-probationary. They've been working for the federal government, some at least for more than a year, some all the way up to the SES level. As Sky was saying a moment ago, no indication they've done anything wrong. In fact, many of them are, decorated employees who've received commendations over their careers for doing outstanding work. They've developed the expertise and they've got the experience to do these jobs right. And so I would think we'd want to keep them in place. but they're at risk for being forced out as well. Schedule F is aimed at essentially stripping away legal protections that federal employees have after they get past their probationary period, apparently so that the president and his minions can force them out of their jobs more quickly and replace them with apparently sort of political hacks. You hate to say it that way, but that looks like what this is. So it looks like the overall goal from him is to move away from a merit-based system, to something more akin to a political loyalty types of scenarios. And in fact, they've got a loyalty oath sort of thing out there already that they're requiring people to give, or that they're going to be requiring them to submit to in the very near future. So a lot of concern about where that's going. I think it's got a lot of goals, but none of them really lead with trying to do the best work for the American public, which is what the civil servants were brought on to do and what they've committed their lives to doing.
Can you tell me more about this loyalty oath? This is the first time that I've actually heard that might be a thing.
Yeah, I saw it was a memo that was circulated by OPM, the acting director of it, and it was paraphrased out in the middle of the memo. And the interesting thing about that is, there are many people who are federal employees. Like when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, for example, I had to take the regular oath that other elected officials are given, or many of the federal employees, give. You swear that you're going to do work to enforce the Constitution and the like. So this is a second oath that some of these people may be taking, and it's not actually the same thing. So it's not explicitly an oath to Donald Trump, but it has some of that kind of feel to it. And you do kind of wonder what the purpose is for people who already have taken an oath to do the work, and many of whom are, they might even have like security clearances and things at this point. Why are they being required to take a second oath, or why is that even being discussed? So I think it's pretty clear indication that what they're trying to do is force people out. They may end up trying to fire people, but I think there's an intimidation phase right now where they're trying to essentially scare people out of the jobs to clear out as many positions as possible. I think they've also got some hiring freezes out there too. So as positions come open through attrition, they're going to keep those open. And I think they're going to try and do that so they can hire without having to go through the competitive processes that you usually have to use for merit-based positions.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Perryman, based on what you were just hearing from the congressman, what is going through your mind?
Well, look, the administration has already shown that it's operating the way it did the first time. A federal judge that was appointed by Ronald Reagan this week has already said that their move on birthright citizenship was blatantly unconstitutional. You're seeing lawsuits already be filed against their attempts to undermine our civil service and the really nonpartisan public interest nature of this civil service. And so I think that you will see a range of legal challenges because much of what they have done ignores the law and seeks to politicize our civil service in ways that it is not intended to be. But just more broadly, in taking a step back, if you care about government efficiency, which we all do, and the communities that I have a privilege of representing in court and that our organization has the privilege of representing, they've got a lot on the line with respect to needing the government to operate efficiently and effectively, and everybody wants that. But what we know and what the data has shown, throughout history is that societies where their civil service operates on favoritism or loyalty are highly prone to corruption, to inefficiency, to actually the very things that that we know the American people don't want when they look to their government. And so to me, this is very related to what we've seen with DOJ. It's related to a bunch of attempts to really create a government in one individual's own image, as opposed to in the image of the American people and for the American people. It is un-American. Much of what they have done is unlawful, and you will see that playing out in the courts. But it is really important, I think, that people that are listening and people at home that care about our society functioning in a sane, functional way, and so that people can go about their lives and be protected and have their security protected, make sure that their food they're eating is properly labeled, make sure their medication is safe. All of these things that we rely on. It is important that every single American that wants that to remain the case be using their voice now. I think Congress needs to hear it a little more loudly. I think some of Rep. Ivey's colleagues on the other side of the aisle really need to hear from people about what's at stake here. I think the president and the administration needs to hear this because they are really taking a wrecking ball to communities and families across the country. And of course, we're going to make sure the courts hear it too.
Hold that point. I hate to interrupt you. I've got to take a really quick break. Don't forget your point. I'll let you finish on the other side. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM, channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our two-part conversation about President Donald Trump's executive orders and the impact on federal government workers and so many other issues. My guests are Congressman Glenn Ivey, a Democrat from Maryland's 4th Congressional District, and Sky Perryman, President and CEO of the nonpartisan organization Democracy Forward. Before the break, I interrupted you, Ms. Perryman. Please finish your point.
No, we're just talking really about what's at stake here. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do at Democracy Forward, in addition to making sure that that people in communities have the representation that they need in court, is also to make sure that the American people can see and understand what's at stake. And so that's why we have launched civilservicestrong.org earlier this week. So your listeners can go to civilservicestrong.org to learn more. Earlier this week, we were proud to welcome the former acting head of the Office of Personnel Management, Rob Shriver, came to join our team to be the managing director of Civil Service Strong, and he's brought a great team with him that is here to ensure that we can use the tools that citizens have here to protect our civil service. But it is really important that people across the country, I think, make their voices heard to their president and to their Congress that this is unacceptable and un-American.
Congressman, I do want to go back to your specific constituents because as you very, very well know that you're familiar with the term, those good government jobs. And for those constituents that are, for example, in Prince George's County, where you represent in part, that those jobs have been very instrumental in providing stability, economic stability for families, which goes to the very foundation of the American dream, being able to buy a good home, living in safe neighborhoods, making sure that your children have access to education, all by simply having a good career path. What might for example, the getting rid of DEI professionals, of which I'm sure there are many, and even not just the senior executive service employees, but some of those GS-14s, some of those GS-15s. When I was speaking to the American Federation of Government Employees just yesterday, their National Secretary Treasurer, Eric Bunn Sr., he said this was a threat to the livelihood of so many government employees.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I think, we've got a fairly long history here in the United States of the federal government being a path into the middle class for so many families, African Americans and beyond. Started with the military in part, when Harry Truman signed the executive order that integrated the Army and the military overall. And we had people like my father-in-law who benefited from that. My father joined the Air Force as well. He used the GI Bill to move up from there. My father then went into work in the Johnson administration, started with a program called Manpower that was aimed at helping people get jobs, sort of entry-level jobs in the North Carolina area. And they moved him up to the Department of Labor in DC, and we moved up there with him. But, there's a long history that goes back to the Johnson administration of people having a chance to build middle-class lives based on the work they did with the federal government for the federal government. And conversely, there's a long history of benefit to the country that came as a byproduct of that. As Sky was mentioning a moment ago, good governance makes a big difference. And, the medicines we take, the foods that we eat, the water we drink, the air that we breathe, in part is, determined by government employees who've been trained and they have the experience, the expertise to make sure the American people are protected from any kind of misconduct on those fronts and beyond. So I think it's important to make sure that the public understands that. And then just quickly, Scott touched on another point. Not all the federal workers work in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. In fact, I think like 80% don't. So they're spread out across the country. Having a chance to build middle-class lives like the ones I just talked about. We started in North Carolina, and there are other people who are benefiting in the South and the West and all across the country. I think it's important for them to make their voices heard to their local members of Congress, their senators, their governors, and ultimately the White House, so they can tell people. The last poll I saw, 95% of the people wanted a system based on merit as opposed to political spoils. The public needs to make sure that their elected officials know that, so we can get this thing back on track.
Let me ask you both this question, and I'll start with Ms. Perryman. And you mentioned this, earlier about birthright citizenship. And on the face, and we talked about this on the program yesterday, and basically in asking my guests yesterday, I gave them a basic, come on. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, come on. I mean, I'm not a constitutional scholar, I'm not a lawyer, but I can read. So do you, from your perspective, Ms. Perryman, do you really think, particularly when the judge in Washington State basically said, come on, and issued the temporary restraining order? Some people may ask, is this really a thing? Is this a real thing? Or is the president just kind of testing the waters here?
Well, look, the president is operating without a regard. I mean, he took an oath on Monday.
Well, he didn't have his hand on the Bible, so that's questionable.
We had to.
But everybody noticed that, that's a whole different shit.
It was probably one of those Trump Bibles that he's been hawking. But anyway,
I think that the one on the bottom may have actually been. I think that is true. But please, Ms. Perry.
Well, he takes an oath on Monday to uphold the Constitution. And there's not as much division in this country as I think people think there is. But what we know all the time is Americans support the Constitution. And he takes an oath to uphold the Constitution. And we haven't even gotten to the end of the week. And you've had a Reagan appointee, a federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, say from the bench, this is absolutely blatantly unconstitutional. And so I think it's important to take this seriously, because we have a president that is seeking to operate outside the bounds of the Constitution in quite bold ways. And while it might be easy to blow off the threat, and I'll tell you, the lawyers are going to do everything. Lawyers are going to do everything we can in court to ensure that people's rights are protected, to ensure the Constitution's defended. But these ideas that are coming out, this is part of this very far right ideology in this country that is really seeking to rewrite our Constitution and rewrite our laws. I mean, we're talking about a generation of Americans, and many of the communities that we represent, women have less rights in this country than they did a few years ago because of this very far right aggressive movement. So I will say, it's blatantly unconstitutional. I think it shows you how they're intending to operate. The courts are going to be a front line in that protection. But I do think that everyone needs to be taking these threats seriously and needs to be using their voice. Congress, they work for us, the American people. The president works for us, the American people. Need to be using their voice that there is no place for this in America, and there's no place for targeting individuals who have dedicated their lives to serving this country in our civil service, in order to settle political scores or to make some shock and awe press release or to decimate and break the government's ability to do the work of the American people.
And as it relates to birthright citizenship, Congressman, on the face of it, and I think a lot of the discussion this week say that this is targeted. People of color, but specifically the Latino community. But the reality is that people of all colors, of all ethnic stripes, people from all over the country have benefited, and in some cases, taken advantage of that. But again, is from the House perspective, do you really believe that changing birthright citizenship has any legs among your colleagues?
Well, I'll say this. I heard Congressman Chip Roy from Texas arguing that the executive order actually is constitutional and this district court judge would be reversed last night on the floor of the House of Representatives after the injunction had been put in place. And Chip Roy is a leading voice, certainly in the Freedom Caucus, but in the House of Representatives on the Republican caucus as well. So I think they're serious about it. I think it's frankly a laughable position, as the judge expressed yesterday. But that doesn't mean that all of the other judges are going to agree with that. And I think we're all mindful of the fact that Trump has packed the Supreme Court. Now, most of the times when he goes to court, he loses. There are very few instances where he's won in court. And that's because he's bringing silly, I think, generally speaking, claims, especially the election fraud stuff. I thought was just ridiculous. But he keeps going. And, he has won some of these. The presidential immunity ruling from the Supreme Court was a jaw dropper from me, and there have been others. So I don't think we can assume everything's going to be fine. And I'll say this as well. The birthright piece, I think, was relatively straightforward based on the plain language of the 14th Amendment. The Schedule F's tougher. Those are going to be harder cases to win. They're going to be.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think it's less clear cut because you don't have clear constitutional language that's stating the rights of federal employees. And there are going to be variations of what protections people get, for example, based on potentially whether they're parts of a union or not, because collective bargaining agreement language might be helpful to protect some employees in a way that it doesn't for others. As I mentioned earlier, probationary employees aren't going to have the same kind of protections that non-probationary employees will have. DEI. I got a call from somebody who's DEI, but she's SES, and SES employees don't have the same kind of protections that other employees do in the mid ranges as well. So these are not gimmies. These are not layups. These are not slam dunks by any stretch. We need to fight these in court. And back to Sky's point, got to fight it in the political sector as well. And that's Congress. I think that's at the White House level as well. We got to understand that the Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. So to the extent they're able to hold together and push things through, they could be passing legislation to support these efforts. So we need to make sure this is no time to relax. This is no time to get overconfident. We've got a major fight on our hands, and it's one for the ages.
Well, in the worst case scenario, if the Schedule F were to get to its full, it's the fullest level of enforcement, what might that look like for Marylanders, for example? If these people lose their jobs and certainly have no protections, if DOJ is cutting out people. What might that mean economically?
Scott, you want to take a crack at that one, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, again, I mean, it's we're hearing from people all over the country, and it's highly problematic. The decimation of our civil service, attempts to decimate it, attempts to undermine the way our government functions, needs to function better. Nobody's saying it doesn't, but the attempts to sort of replace with partisan loyalists, political loyalists, and with Doge, unelected billionaires. There's just a poll that came out today saying that like the overwhelming majority of Americans disapprove of the type of influence that Elon Musk is having over the government. But I think that it will create a lot of economic havoc, not just in communities that rely on civil service jobs, which are, by the way, communities across the entire country. The 2.2 million civil servants live and work in every community across this country. And at Democracy Forward, you can go to our website, democracyforward.org. You can go to the civilservicestrong.org website, and you can find a report that we put out that shows by state hundreds of thousands of federal employees that live and work across the country. So just to be clear about that, but I think it's not only devastating to those communities that rely on those jobs, but it's devastating because it will undermine our overall government's ability to deliver services for the American people. So a lot of our businesses and industries and our local economies and our national economies rely on predictability and stability. And that is the opposite of what you have seen in this last week. And there will be consequences for it. And we've seen a number of organizations and institutions speak out as a result of that. So I think that we'll have to see how it plays out, but I'm not seeing anything that's going to lower Americans' costs. President signed an executive order on the first day to try to reverse progress on making prescription drugs more affordable. One of the major accomplishments of the last 4 years. I mean, we're seeing nothing like that. And I think the civil service attacks and the influence of Doge and all of that, make that much worse.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Perryman, outside of Schedule F, outside of the move to remove DEI employees, what is the other executive order that most concerns your organization?
I mean, we are concerned about a slew of the executive orders that were signed. I mean, I'll just say that one of their attempts is to govern by chaos, to try to, and they even say like shock and awe, to create such a spectacle, to overload, flood the zone, these strategic decisions, so that then people only focus on one issue. And it's like, well, what are the top priorities? Well, the top priorities are that this is a harmful and unpopular, and in many instances, unlawful agenda. And we need to move beyond it. The American people need to say not on our watch. The courts need to say not on our watch. Congress needs to say that. And we need to get on with the work that government really needs to be doing for people in like such a critical time. But just before this show, I saw a notification. I haven't read the article yet, but I saw a notification that, as expected, Trump is going to try to condition funding for people in California whose homes, I have friends whose homes have been burned to the ground, but try to condition funding to the state put conditions on that funding. I mean, this is not the way the government is supposed to operate. It's supposed to operate in service of the people. And so I think that really needs, to me, that is what is concerning about what we've seen in these first, we're at 5 days, and these first days in office. And that is the work that we will be doing in our part of the world to make sure that people have access to the courts. And I know that's the work that Rep. Ivey and some of his colleagues are going to be doing in their part of the world to make sure that Congress is really paying attention.
Well, one of the things that I will tell you that he did say after landing in North Carolina this morning to see the devastation that Hurricane Helene did to people living in Western North Carolina, he said on the tarmac, we're getting rid of FEMA and the money is going to come directly from the federal government, which FEMA is the federal government. So that's, we can get into the whole semantical argument about that. But I don't again, just as an outsider's perspective, I say that tongue in cheek but Congressman, how might that work? If you get rid of FEMA and it comes from the federal government, then again, you're getting rid of federal government workers, and you can criticize FEMA as imperfect. No agency is, but as Ms. Perryman was saying, whether it's making aid conditional, or that's one thing. Getting rid of federal government workers by getting rid of FEMA, that's a whole different thing. And it just seems, again, from the outside looking in, that it would just be really problematic.
That's a fair statement. I mean, I think what he doesn't understand or he doesn't care about is that FEMA provides a lot of immediate assistance that's needed when these areas are hit by disasters. So if you take Western North Carolina, for example, you had sort of unexpected flooding caused by a hurricane in areas that had not experienced that kind of flooding, I guess, ever. And so what roads were gone, houses were washed away. We all saw the images of that stuff. What he's saying, I think, is that we'll just send money down there and they'll figure it out. The problem with that is, where would the money even go? These people, their houses got washed away too. Many of them died in the disaster. What FEMA does is it sends experts down there who have experience doing these kinds of things, and they put in immediate resources that are needed, whether it's food or shelter. They create networks to help get medical services and other kind of aid available. And they do that on a basis where they've got a national network to do that because they've done it over and over again. If you had the people in Western North Carolina have to do that, to stand up that kind of emergency program from scratch in the middle of the emergency, obviously it would be unsuccessful. And it would take longer to get it done. So I know that's become part of the Republican talking points, but let me say this. I saw one of the Republican congressmen from that part of North Carolina when they were doing the attacks on FEMA while this was happening, and he said, stop. These guys are not picking houses based on whether they have Trump signs in their yards. They're getting the services to us. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we would have had otherwise, and I appreciate them being here to do it. And I think that's the sense you'll get, generally speaking. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today. Remember when Chris Christie met President Obama after a hurricane? I think that was Sandy.
Yes.
From the Republican Party perspective, when Chris Christie went out on the tarmac, met the president and shook his hand for coming to provide the billions of dollars of assistance, that was the end of Chris Christie's career as a Republican. He was basically, excommunicated from the Republican Party for that, but it made a difference in helping the people of New Jersey recover. And that's the kind of bipartisanship we need, whether it's New Jersey, Western North Carolina, or right now, LA. We need the bipartisanship, not this silly rhetoric that Trump and others are throwing out there.
I've got to mention this too in these last 5 minutes or so. And I'll start with you, Congressman. The raids that we are seeing on the immigrant communities around the country, in your district, there are just about every kind of immigrant possible, Latino, West African. There are, there's even a smattering of some Eastern Europeans in Prince George's County. And other parts of Maryland in your district and just across the state. What are your concerns about how this is going to affect your district?
Yeah, it's a great point. We're one of the most diverse districts in the country, and we've been going through this for a while. In fact, when I was state's attorney, we had versions of this at the time. But one of the things that the federal government didn't understand at that point is when you come in and start, basically just grabbing people off the streets like this, it's tremendously destabilizing to that community. You separate families and the like. But from my perspective as a law enforcement officer, what it meant was that witness in the homicide case that was coming up on Monday, he got swept up and he's been deported somewhere in Central America. And I don't know about it till Monday morning when the jury's seated and my witness isn't there. those are the types of things that can happen. You can have people who attack, they rob somebody, they become violent predators, but they say to their victims, well, I think you're illegal, so you can't go to the cops because they'll deport you and separate you from your children. Just things like that undermine our ability to actually get the violent criminals off the street. That's what this stuff can do. And then with the other factors too, like now you got kids, they're talking about doing these raids at schools, elementary
and churches, schools and churches. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so people are afraid to send their kids to school. What's the long-term impact of that? Well, we get a lot of kids that don't learn how to read over time. And what does that mean going forward? So, the ripple effect of this is pretty significant, but the part of this that might make sense to Trump at his level is you got business communities that have, whether it's hospitality, agriculture, meat packing, a lot of these industries where you have people here from other states who aren't necessarily, or other countries who aren't necessarily here illegally. Those industries could shut down and grind to a halt if you're not careful with the deportations. Construction's another one. Mm-hmm. So, they'll have to factor all of that in. And then at the other end of that spectrum, I just met with some business leaders here in Prince George's County. They have a need for high-tech skill sets. They can't find enough people here in the United States to have those. And there's specialty versions of that. They want to try and bring them in from other countries. But it takes so long to get through our process that some of these guys are starting to relocate to Canada so that they don't have to worry about bringing these engineers in through the U.S. system because it takes a year. They can get them to Canada in a matter of days. We're losing money. We're hurting our industries. We're hurting our businesses with this kind of approach. And we obviously know we're damaging families and in many instances, kids that, bear no guilt on anything connected with this.
Ms. Perryman, I'll let you have that last minute.
Well, I mean, look, I'm from Texas originally and still spend a lot of time there and have, wonderful family and friends and keep close ties to the community. And the economics experts have been quite clear about the devastating impact. But this is also beyond that, because people's humanity and the way that our government functions is not just about dollars and cents, and it's not just about economic impact. It's about who we are as people. And you have already seen someone come into office, swear an oath to the Constitution, and then with the stroke of a pen, try to deprive people in this country of their fundamental constitutional rights that are recognized by the 14th Amendment and that are long recognized. Thankfully, a judge has shut that down, as it should be. But and that case will continue to proceed with so many wonderful advocates and state attorneys generals and others across the country that are working on that case. But I think that this should be a moment that people get some clarity. We all need to, I think, look in the mirror and say, this is our country. This is supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people, not in the image of Elon Musk, not in the image of one individual person, but in the image of the people. And I think that's really what we've seen this week, is that they've wasted no time in trying to undermine that principle of American values, that thing that we all strive for. But there are lots of people that are going to do everything we can to make sure that people and communities can respond. And we know, and our history shows us, that when we work together, we can break through and have some better days than what we've seen the last few.
Lots of work ahead. Sky Perryman, Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We will definitely be in touch.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
That is the Daily Drum for this Friday, January 24th, 2025. For News Director Renee Nash, I'm Harold Fisher. Good night